This is Fam Electric Ghost. We're live on the air for the first time with Kevin Palmieri. Sorry.
No
Welcome
worries.
to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing today?
I am living the dream, Phantom. I appreciate you having me. Congrats on, I think I saw over 1,000 episodes. So congrats on that. That's huge. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, we're actually at episode 1010. Been on tracking on Apple Podcast since 2016. And we have your URL up there, nextleveluniverse.com. And then there's a / the other things. That will be fully clickable. So people can just click on that and click through when we're fully published. And I do want to thank you for being on the show today. We are a featured podcast on the Newsly ME network, and that's an audio podcast platform. So we give the folks out there the coupon code of Ghost. They can check that out. We're going to be on
Right on.
Newsly later today. But
Right on.
thank you again for being on the show because we love talking to people from around the world. We've been doing it for a while, but it's always cool to talk to another podcaster. So maybe you can tell you're the co-host and CFO of the Next Level University, which is a top 100 self-improvement podcast. Just to give people a better background, and if you want to like give you a little like elevator pitch for your story, we can
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
start off with that and then just continue in a live fashion.
Yeah. So I was a young man who had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So after high school, I decided not to go to college. I worked a bunch of odd jobs. I worked at a gas station. I worked as a personal trainer, truck driver, forklift operator, in construction. Very short time on the on-call firefighting, the firefighter department, and then I ended up getting a job that brought me a lot of financial freedom. It brought me quote unquote success, but I still ended up sitting on the edge of a bed contemplating suicide when I was the most successful, and that's in quotations for those who are just listening.
Mm.
Ended up starting a podcast in 2017, fell in love with it, left my job in 2018, and I've been podcasting full time since 2018. But for the first 3 years, I was doing it full time with no results at all, less than part time results with full time effort. But now we are blessed to have a successful business that we built through the podcast.
That's really cool. I mean, because I kind of fell into podcasting back in 2016. I'm a musician and I'm a software designer.
Mm.
And so some guy named Rock Tunes found me on my SoundCloud and said, "Hey, you got a lot of songs. Let me talk to you." And I said, "Well, what's a podcast?" I didn't even know what it was. And then he said, "Well, it's like a radio interview." And that was back when we were using an app called Spearmint. It was just an audio. And we liked each other so much that we started doing a podcast about music for six
Mm.
months. And then eventually he decided he didn't want to do it. And I said, "Well, I'm going to pay it forward. I'm going to actually go onto Instagram and talk to other musicians I would communicate with and actually do like behind the music, like interviews." And that's
Mm.
how I started. And I just did it because I like to talk to people. And I felt like it's like a master class to keep on talking to people. So after 1,000 episodes, it's like 1,000 hours of talking to people. That was the benefit for me. And then it
Yeah.
actually helps my brand and it helps my music, it helps people find me. So that was the whole purpose. And then other things have come along.
Yeah.
But in the whole world of podcasting has changed since 2016. And now there's this universe of podcasters out there that wasn't, where my head was at back in 2016. But yeah,
Mm.
it's an interesting trip.
Yeah. A lot has changed. A lot has changed. A lot has evolved. And now see, you were ahead of the curve, right? We didn't start till 2017. But so much has changed since then where now podcasting's kind of the sexy thing. And usually when something becomes the sexy thing, the barrier to entry goes down and the failure rate goes up. So just because podcasting seems sexy does not mean it is the next wave for you to find your level of success. There's going to be a lot of effort that has to go into it, just like anything else. So I always throw that out there. I love podcasting. We just recorded our 1512th episode. So we're up in the thousands as well, and we love it. I absolutely love it. We do an episode every day, just like you. But I will not sugarcoat the fact that it has been brutal to get to where we are today and turn it into a business. So I always want to be honest and transparent about that.
Yeah, I mean, cause yeah, I mean, my goal was never to actually do it full time. I'm a software designer. That's my full time gig,
Mm,
and then my music is like their next priority. I'm in my studio with all
yeah.
my Moogs and Rolands, what I found was it was just a way to initially talk to other musicians. And what I did is I talked to emerging and independent artists that I didn't think were being paid attention to. Most of them were actually female artists that I didn't think were getting enough attention. And then it branched out. My focus had been like expansive. So I talked to punkers, EDM, DJs, country rockers, classical musicians. I didn't really care what genre. And I said, well, why not do the same thing with the podcast? So I talked poets, painters, photographers, and then I started talking to people who are entrepreneurs, and then life coaches and mentors. And then it became this very expansive, wide-ranging thing where it's like creativity and then linking music as a common thread has been my magic, sauce or mixture. And it seems to have worked. But I'm not super big. I've always been kind of an underground guy, and it's not that I don't want to stay in the underground, but that's just been my motif.
What have you ever gone back and listened to like the beginning episodes?
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Because I know it makes me feel bad about myself.
Well, initially we were on Spearman, and it was just an iPhone app. We didn't use mics. We just used the standard capability of the iPhone, and the quality was not, it was whatever version of the iPhone there was in 2016. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And what I started to do is, since I'm a musician and a producer, I said, why don't I take my mixers and my studio level mics that I used to record songs with and start using that gear, and then use some of my video cameras that I used to make music videos. It's like, why can't I do that? And I started to go video back in 2020. I didn't go video until 2020. And then I found, StreamYard, and then, Anchor turned into Spotify for podcasters. I'm on tons of other platforms too. I use whatever platform I can. But I just started to realize I could leverage my musician tools, like actually using a real mixer that I used to record with, and then using. So I mean, the thing is, once video podcasting came, it allowed us to level up to be able to use the higher end technologies and stuff that I was using for music production, which was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, it was the opposite for me. So I remember I used to, when I was in, high school, I loved rapping. And it all came from a place of back on AOL Instant Messenger. For those of you who remember that, shout out to the good old days. But one of my buddies and I were having a conversation, and then we just started to rhyme words. So it would be like cat, and then he had to rhyme a word. It was fat, and then it was bat, and then it was at. And I noticed that when we started to getting into like multiple syllables, he couldn't do it, and it was pretty easy for me. And I remember thinking, this has to be something. So this was probably like 2005, 2004. I ordered a microphone off of eBay or something. I don't know where I got it from. And I remember I started recording not good music, but I was recording raps. And then in 2017, when I got equipment, and then 2018, 2019, I started to record songs because I had, to your point, I had multiple mixers, I had multiple cameras, I knew how to do editing, I knew how to do mixing and matching. So it was kind of the opposite for me as it was for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I found is just the idea that a lot of people want to make things perfect. So like I found like podcasters that would only record, they would never go live. And I'm kind of the musician that I like what I call the flow state and like fusion jazz. And the idea I've always talked about, like there's a famous quote from Herbie Hancock. He was playing with Miles Davis, and he actually made a mistake. He did the wrong chord for the song they were doing, and he thought Miles was going to kill him. Then Miles actually changed the song in that moment and told him that, like, fusion jazz, that's the point. The point is, like, we take a trip, the song's evolving. And so and he said, what I learned is I can be in the present. I don't be so anxious about trying to make things perfect. And as a musician and producer, I'm a child of the 70s. I'm really into the happy accident, listening to something like Exile on Main Street with Keith Richards and the voice. It's like, there's something about allowing something to be, like an earlier take. Even Elton John talked about it on Yellow Brick Road. Taking something on a third or fourth take instead of 99th take. It's a risk, but it's more authentic.
Yeah.
And I've always been the type of person that likes like authentic, kind of real, not exactly perfect, more of a punk aesthetic,
Mm.
you know, or
Yeah.
jazz aesthetic. So that's been my motif where I've run into people that like, oh, I want to pull all the ahs and ums out. I want to go back and re-record it, and I'm like, that's not how I do
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
We're the same way. We're the same way. Early on, we decided that we were not going to edit our podcast unless there's a technical issue or unless sometimes we'll misspeak and we'll use someone's full name when we don't want to. We want to keep the anonymity for them, so we'll cut that out. But likes, I need to listen back because we listen back to our episodes. I need the feedback to get better because, to your point, I'm a speaker. When I'm on stage, there are no safety nets. There
Yeah.
are no safety nets. And to your point, there's a lot of creative freedom where if I mess something up, I can kind of go that way. I was at a wedding recently, and I was sitting at the table with a couple of the bridesmaids that were going to be giving a speech, and one of them was super nervous. And I said, I'm going to give you a cheat code. Nobody knows what you're going to say, so you can't technically mess up. Nobody has any clue what you're going to say. So even if you mess up, nobody's going to know you messed up. And she said, wow, that's a really good thought. I appreciate it. I said, well, I've messed up enough to realize that oftentimes we're more afraid of us knowing we messed up than somebody else. So I can definitely resonate with that.
Also this consistency and showing up. My grandpa was a coal miner. He always said this showing up is the deal. Like if you
Yeah.
consistently, you can say, well, I hate my job, but like if you show up in life, then you can progress and things will get better. Right. And so like I knew a lot of guys when I was 17, and they stopped playing because they had some like goal and they didn't hit it.
Yeah.
But my goal was like, I just love playing the keys. So whether or not somebody likes it or not, I like playing the keys. So that wasn't going to stop until I decided I don't like playing the keys.
Yeah.
But it's like, why are you doing what you're doing? And so there's a lot of people, there's a lot of the stories about podcasters like, not making it after 12 episodes because they don't hit this goal. And I always said, like I said before, is I fit to it like it's a master class. Like I'm learning from these people I talk to, and I get these opportunities. And so whether or not I hit the algorithm or not, I've had opportunities where I got to talk to a Grammy Award-winning producer, and I don't have super big numbers, but they saw an episode and they approached me, and I got to talk to them. Talk to two Grammy Award-winning producers, and they liked what I was doing. And it's sometimes like the numbers don't show you the impact.
Yeah.
So like if you show up and you're present and you just love what you're doing, then you get opportunities that sometimes the metrics don't measure.
You create a winnable game. That's really what it is. Imagine two people, one person who works out to get a result, the other person who works out because they love it. I'm willing to bet the person who works out because they love it is going to stick with it longer. Or the person, I have no real aspirations when it comes to rapping. I don't ever expect, I'm never going to perform live. I don't expect to make it anywhere. I just love finding a beat. Yeah, I just love the creativity around how do I make these words fit on this beat and tell a story? How does that all work? I anticipate I will probably do it for a long period of time. I'll definitely get further than I would have if I said I have to have a hit song or whatever it may be. So yeah, I'm all for that. I think you have created a winnable game, even though you can't win it, but you're kind of winning through the process of the journey. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, because you get opportunities. Like as a musician, I've gotten to work with people all over the world, where I've been able to collaborate with like an artist in Tokyo, some people in South Africa. And just because I showed up, they say that, people approach me and then they just say, hey, I want to do something because I dig what you're doing. And that's not even the podcast. It's like my music itself, which is like, very experimental. But it's like if you get it's kind of idea like everybody listened to the Velvet Underground, started their own band, right? They weren't commercially successful, but Lou Reed actually influenced like whole generation of songwriters because he just put that out there, and it was something that really didn't fit during the hippie era. He had this weird kind of proto punk idea of spoken word noise and weirdness that generations of artists totally respect him, and people can't imagine that Lou Reed wasn't famous, but he wasn't. And so the idea that, art, if you're one of my favorite Victorian poets, William Blake, was not known during the Victorian age. He was known after the Victorian age because they found his work. Because he actually put his poems into plates of artwork that made them permanent. And so they found them, those songs of experience and innocence. And so sometimes, like if you just, some artists have this thing where they don't think they're good enough. They're like, they have this imposter syndrome, so they won't ever present their work. And I'm always like trying to encourage people to present your work, and you never know out there in this world there's an audience that might dig what you're doing.
Yeah, or they might just dig you.
Yeah.
If somebody digs you, they're gonna dig what you're doing most likely. Wasn't that similar for? And this was before, I'm 34, so this was before my time. But I've heard many stories about the Grateful Dead. Weren't they not commercially, quote unquote, successful, but they also had the highest like tours ever?
Yeah, they were not, because they were doing 20-minute songs.
Yeah,
they're doing 10-minute songs. Their whole thing was these jam sessions that didn't have structure. And then they have a couple albums where they actually focused and they made songs. But their beginnings is they just were like the ultimate jam band.
Yeah.
And in the hippie culture in that area in San Francisco, they just dug the fact that these guys would go on 5-6 hours. They just go on and on. And being a musician, I'm a big fan of like tons of people like that, Funkadelic and Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. They had those kind of ideas. Allman Brothers. They would go. I would go see them, and they just jam. They're just jamming. I was like, well, that's no structure. Like, so people today somehow have gotten into this idea that everything has to be an algorithm tripping structure that's 2 minutes long, and it has to have these codes, key things. It has to have the same pads, the same links, same soft synths, the same pads. And it's like boring. I'm very much a big fan of people in the bleeding edge or pushing it. I listen to the bottom 1,000, bottom 500, underground radio, underground mixtapes to find people to talk to, because I want to hear something that somebody isn't doing, hasn't already done 1,000 times.
Right.
I want to hear something that's more interesting to me.
You're an interesting cat, Phantom. You're an interesting cat. I'm grateful. So I always do a little bit of research before I jump on a show with someone just to make sure I know who they are and all that. And it's very opposite of what everybody else is kind of looking for. Everybody else is looking for the next big thing. You're looking for the old new thing. Or the old, kind of that, which I respect that.
Yeah, well, because, I've always been a big fan of like the kind of, I don't know if you ever heard of a band called Big Star. Big Star was this guy, Alex Chilton. He was in the Box Tops. We did this famous song called The Letter. Big Star is kind of like the modern 1970s version of the Velvets. Tons of bands from Wilco to Radiohead. Name check Alex Chilton. He's he's the songwriter behind that band. And they're like an unknown power pop band that sounded kind of like the Beatles, but they weren't the Beatles. They weren't Badfinger. They just had this sound that was very strange. They were Southerners, but they made themselves sound like they were coming from like England. They sounded like they were the Yardbirds of the Beatles, but they didn't really bite off the Beatles. They had this other sound. And a lot of like alternative artists loved them, like the Replacements, Who's to Do, REM, Counting Crows. They name checked them all the time. If they ever talked to the lead singers of those bands, they go, Alex Chilton's a genius. And I'm like, so I was like, well, who's Alex Chilton when I was a kid? And it's like, I need to figure out who this guy is. And Rolling Stone and all these magazines gave him 5-star reviews for their 3 big albums that he came out. Hardly anybody knows who they are. But then you find all these producers knew who they were. And, people like from the Counting Crows to REM, Michael Stipe, those guys knew who they were. So that's why I was always very interested. Is like sometimes it's not the most popular person on the street that actually influences art.
Would you rather be commercially successful or internally respected?
Well, I like being respected by other musicians. Like I said, I've had some Grammy award-winning producers like dig what I'm doing. And I've had producers, I've talked to over 300, 400 musicians around the world, and they kind of get what I'm doing. And that to me has been really kind of kept me going, whether, in terms of like, I do have something that's working with people who are kind of like insiders that understand, that type of thing. And it just like, it makes you feel like, well, like, it's not just my family that likes me. I've got some Grammy award winning producers that like me. I've got some artists like from Japan to Australia to South Africa that like what I'm doing. So I know that what I'm doing is in the zone of maybe the creative producer, singer, songwriter aesthetic, which to me is like, it's cool. Yeah. No songwriter is going to say like, I wouldn't want to be big.
Yeah.
It would be cool to be big, but it's cool to actually be acknowledged that you're actually doing something that's interesting.
Mm.
And if I ever get some songs that ever really kick off, that's always cool. It's always cool to be loved by the fans, but it's also it feels good when other artists like get what you're doing.
Do you have a favorite song that you've done?
One of my favorite songs I've ever written was on an EP I did, Disconnected Youth. I did this EP and it got picked up by a small Swedish label and it got put out. And I got a good review where they compared me to some stuff that Trent Reznor was doing. And it wasn't what I was trying to do, Trent Reznor stuff. I just happened to be there. Because sometimes I'm like in a Velvet Underground mode or I'm in a Funkadelic mode. I kind of do multiple genres. And it was just interesting. And then when I did that record, the record label that picked me up for that release, they thought I was like just a Nine Inch Nails guy. And then they saw all this other work I had and they weren't interested in my other work. They were only interested in the work that sounded like Trent Reznor. And I was like, well, that's just where I am sometimes. And so it was interesting with them. It's like they just wanted me to stay there, which is interesting in music. Like people want you to be in a lane and then they figure that you should stay in that lane. It's like my thing is I don't like to stay in the lane.
Yeah, I can tell. Like maybe I've gathered that.
And I would have probably done better if I would have. I would kind of like, oh well, am I self-sabotage? No, it's just like I just don't like to stay in the same zone. Like if I'm not interested in doing that, my next song's not going to be that. So they don't like that. Sometimes in the industry, they want you to stay kind of predictable.
What is your, and at any time, if you want me to stop asking questions, just tell me to shut up. But as a podcaster, I'm super curious, right? What is your creative process like? How does it go from a thought in the shower to a jam session? Is it a life experience? Like how does it go from in your brain to on a recording?
Well, like I'm in my studio. I'm surrounded by a lot of analog. I'm a keyboardist, as I've indicated, but I'm a sound designer. So what that means is I have synthesizers that actually take waveforms, like sound waves, and start my tones. I actually build my tones from scratch using analog and digital synthesizers that actually create sounds. So I don't use pre-packaged sounds. I create my own sounds first. So every time I start a project, I'm like a painter coloring, taking the different colors and making new colors. I am creating those tones or timbres from scratch to create the kind of sound painting. This is the idea of a sound painting that the Beatles talked about and Hendrix talked about. When people asked them like what they were doing, they say, well, we're using sound like a canvas and we're making sound paintings. So everything I start with is usually in that kind of vein. And I might have a poem or some kind of idea in my head. That's a theme, but I will let the music start. I'll usually start with the sound waves, and then I'll start with the percussion next, and then I'll start tracking. And I'll just have my multi-tracks. I don't use DAWs. I use actually multi-track recorders, like 1980s, 70s type of recorders. That just multi-track pickup tracks. And I start putting stuff down. And it basically what I end up learning my song because I actually hand play it. I play all the parts and I build the song up. So by the time I'm done with my song, I know my song.
Right.
Rather than being on the grid, I actually could go play it because I learned it. And so it's a kind of an old school technique. And a lot of people say, well, it takes too much time. But to me, that's the process. And I like that process because it makes me feel like I really learned what I actually built this idea, and I become a control freak. So I played all the parts. I played the bass, the guitar, everything. And so I end up learning the whole thing. And it's like it's my world. I create like an author that creates they create their world building, like a science fiction author, a fantasy author. They create these worlds, and I've talked to authors about how they do their character design. That's how I approach my music, like that.
Mm. How long does it take from thought to creation? Like you said, it takes longer. How long does it take you to write one song? Write, record, all of it.
Well, it's interesting. Like some songs can take like weeks,
Mm.
but some songs are so. It's kind of interesting. Like if I just sometimes some songs just come to you like a dream. It's like in your subconscious, and it just comes out. And I can hardly explain it. It's like the muse comes to you,
Mm.
and you just have this flow state, and it just happens. And so I have these recorders that can pick up all my instruments all at once and then track them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
all my instruments go to a track. So then later I can mix them. So I've had songs where like second take, first take, I liked it and I actually kept it and I actually put it out that way.
Mm.
And sometimes that song happened in like, a half hour, 45 minutes. And it was like, it's hard to explain to people how could that happen, but it does. And so lately it happens when you start to trust yourself. And if you've been
Mm.
playing since you're 17 and you're 56, it happens more and more as if you play a lot and you practice a lot. I used to read about, some of the great people, the artists like Hendrix and Prince and Neil Young, they had these techniques, and Frank Zappa. He would go with his band and just put something down.
Mm.
And a lot of times it's the first, second, third take that was cool. And it's kind of like when you trust yourself and you don't overthink. If you don't
Yeah.
overthink it and you don't get so anxious about it, and you kind of like you feel like you're a vessel. A lot of musicians I've talked to, even the famous ones I've talked to, they feel like sometimes things just come to you,
Mm.
and it's like sometimes it's kind of fully fleshed out, and you accept it. And it's like, well, some of it's your subconscious, and some of it's something else. And some people don't do it like that. They're very intricate. They got to write it out.
Mm.
Other people, sometimes it comes like a full picture, and you just take it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it's finding flow. Even as a on our podcast, we used to prep. I used to have a whiteboard. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I had my stories. And then now we're at the stage where we kind of just freestyle it, and I trust the fact that I'm going to be able to pull something valuable from this brain at some point. But to your point, it does come with experience. So that makes a lot of sense from that frame, at least. I think I can connect it to that.
Yeah, it's kind of like with podcasting. Initially, I have my notes
Yeah.
and I have a screen off to the side and I have the questions that people like to be asked and I have their background, their bio. And when I do my interviews, I just have that there. But a lot of times what I've learned is like it's listening skills.
Mm.
So I will listen to what the guest is saying. And I might have a list of the top 10 questions, but if they say something that's
Yeah.
not on that list, I'm not totally, I don't have to just be totally tied to that list.
Yeah.
If they say something interesting, then we might dive into this rabbit hole that we call live podcast. And I go and I just, riff it.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what, it's not that different than fusion jazz or bebop or punk aesthetic, experimental music. When you're with people, that was always interesting when I'm with other musicians. If I have to tell somebody the chord chart and I got to tell them the key, then I'm not really that vibing that well,
Mm.
right? Like when I'm with guys that I don't have to tell them the chord I'm in, if I don't have to give them the key and they just pick it up, then I usually have a better experience with the people who just like, because a lot of times they know it. Like it's like, why are you asking me when you're a musician, you know what key I'm in.
Mm.
So it's almost like they don't trust themselves. Like, well, you know what key it is, you hear
Yeah. Yeah.
it. Just go with it.
Yeah. Well, you see it. I've seen that a lot with podcasters too, even to your point. I'll go on shows. I've been on probably 700, 800 other shows at this point. And one of the most common things is people just hammer you with the same 10 questions. And I want to kindly say to them, take a risk. Like, you don't have to ask me the stuff that's on there. That's more for you than it is for me. Use it as an outline, but take a risk. Ask me something wild. Let's just see what happens. Use it as an opportunity to get outside the box. So I resonate with that for sure.
Well, it's like the vulnerability. People are so scared
Yeah,
of
yeah,
making a mistake.
yeah.
Like my common thing I tell people when I work with an artist is I don't want to hear that you can match the top 20. And you think
Mm.
you think you want to do that, or you want to show me that you can do a ghost like song. I already do ghost songs, right? So why I tell people is show me the song that you're scared to show anybody
Mm,
else. Show me the song that you don't think it was going to make it, that you're scared of, because I think that is your authentic you.
yeah.
So to just go and show me that you can copy anything that's out there doesn't really show me anything. I want to know who you are.
Mm,
And so like when you do that, then you that's their kind of authentic, vulnerable self.
yeah.
Because people are so scared of judgment. They're like, well, my ideas are weird, so nobody really wants to hear them. So I better stay in the box.
Mm.
And now I'm kind of like, I don't need to be in the box. I don't want you to be, show me something a little out of the box.
Mm. Well, do you feel very confident in who you are as a human?
I think I've gotten confident, and it's a story about that. Is like I am a cancer survivor. When I was
Mm,
27, I survived a level 3 sarcoma, and pre-cancer, ghost or phantom is like, I was scared of everything. I would have never even done. I wasn't into public speaking. I was only a musician that would play. I wouldn't sing my own stuff.
mm,
Post cancer, I said, well, what am I scared of? I survived it, and then I lived in Japan. I did things. I mean, I do a lot of things I wouldn't have done the pre-cancer version of myself. So I think what happened is I realized, like, why would I be scared? I mean, you get scared of things, but still, the things that I was most fearful of, I actually hit dead on. I started going to poetry slams, reading poetry, started going to places and just playing live and not caring what anybody thought, and just doing it. And I think that is it's hard for people to get to that point. But a lot of times when I've talked to people on the show that are entrepreneurs or artists, they've all kind of hit that crucible moment
yeah.
where they decided they were going to get out of their own way.
Mm.
And I think that's where I end up talking to them because they got out of their own way.
Necessity. Somebody asked me yesterday, I was on a podcast, and they said, do you think it takes rock bottom for people to change? And I said, I don't know if it has to be rock bottom, but I think there's got to be some level of discomfort for you to say, whatever I'm doing right now isn't sustainable. I don't know. If it's not bad enough to change, then we probably won't. There's not enough necessity. If you put your hand in lukewarm water, you're probably not going to pull it out. But if the water gets really cold or really hot, you're gonna facilitate some sort of change. And it's that's something we learned pretty quickly. We haven't interviewed as many people as you because you do a lot more interviews. We do solo now. But in the beginning, it was this person has a wild story. Wow, that's unique. And then it got to the point where, yes, this is a unique story, but the through line is always adversity creates something. And then
Yeah,
it got
it's
to the point
opportunity.
where, yeah. And then it got to the point where it was your adversity can become your advantage if you know how to harness it. And now it makes sense because everybody has their own unique version of that story. And then what they do with that is usually the triumph or more tribulations, depending.
Well, creatives, we mine our trauma. Like
Mm,
songwriters, are famous for mining their trauma. That's what we do. Because if you ever notice, most of the songs that work are the ones that are melancholy or sad.
yeah.
Once in a while, I mean, you get the disco or you get funky, stuff that's funky is like, okay, it's happy. But a lot of times when you read lyrics, even if something seems bombastic and very, very rhythmic, the lyrics are kind of duality. Sometimes the
Mm,
lyrics have an edge that's really, melancholy, but the beat is infectious. So a
mm,
lot of artists, we like to play with the duality. A lot of times there's going to be that kind of serious pain driven work. And we'll use hooks to kind of hook you in to make it seem like, people don't really get what it is because they hear the beat. But a lot of times it is driven from, psychic trauma.
mm,
It's like
mm.
almost every creative I've ever dealt with is like their best work comes from a bad place that they worked through, and they used it as a cathartic device. And that's just like how like why people do art therapy. Well,
Yeah.
well, that's what artists do it all the time.
Yeah. What was your music like when you were going through the cancer? Like when you were really in the thick of it?
In the cancer, I was still doing just what I called sounds paintings, and they didn't have lyrics. there were these big like movements. There were like 10, 15-minute long
Mm.
things that could be used for like soundtracks. And they'd be very emotional because, classical music or instrumental music can have a lot of emotion. And you can put a lot of that pain into the movement of the struck, in that type of music. There's a lot of passages, or like I said, there's movements, there's rhythmic changes, there's crescendos, decrescendos, all kinds of stuff that has emotional impact. And so it was very much that, and the impact was in the way that the music was flowing or ebbing and going up and down like a wave. It's just after I got out of the cancer, I said, well, you know what? If I'm ever going to progress, I got to actually start doing vocals and actually start doing lyrics. And that was a big moment when I said, well, how am I going to do that? And I approached it. But initially, I didn't like my male voice, so I pitched my voice like Prince to like a Camille. I created a character called Josephine Electric, and I used a technology to create this character who was a ghost. The whole idea of Family Electric Ghost is a band full of ghosts, and Josephine was the lead singer. So the first Family Electric Ghost albums have Josephine being the lead singer. It's only in the last like 3 years I actually introduced other ghosts that have male voices or other female voices, and it's the whole idea of this collective of ghosts that decide to go out on the road and people don't realize they're ghosts. Kind of like the Gorillas. It's a
Yeah.
made up idea. It's a made up concept, and it worked. It was interesting. It was different, and so we got other producers saying like, well, "What are you doing here? That's interesting. It's very progressive, kind of art rock type of thing." And I was able to take a lot of ideas because mixing the male and female voices, I could come at things like if I'm playing Josephine can do a different song than a male singer's song. It can have different topics, so I can address all kinds of things that normally you couldn't address. And it just opened up a whole world for me to be kind of real and go at that. A lot of creativity, a lot of people will say it's kind of feminine. Creativity in itself is this feminine kind of aspect of, and when you talk to artists, they kind of talk about that being your creativity is kind of feminine in its motivation. And so when you see guys like Bowie and Freddie Mercury and Prince, you like, well, yeah, there is something to that with like the falsetto that's used in music by even, guys like Axl Rose and stuff, or like Geddy Lee. Is like, why do they do that? Because it's kind of that part of that mindset. It's just an artistic idea, but
I'm learning so much. Also, and I just lost the rest of my afternoon because I'm gonna be creeping around the interwebs to listen to you. So very, very, very interesting. I feel like I'm learning so much. I feel like I'm picking your brain and trying to digest what I understand.
Well, I think it's interesting to me that the entrepreneurship, is like a lot of people is like, well, how can a musician talk to like entrepreneurs and people who are business people? It's like, well, all musicians are entrepreneurs. We're selling a widget, which is our song. We're selling a service, which is our music, which is going to help you get through something.
Yeah.
And so it's still a product. We're still pitching. We still have to find a way to market it. And so that's when and then I was able to kind of spin that, with the podcast is like, how can I be more expansive? Because I started finding that my musical guest, I wasn't able just to survive with that. So I needed to branch out to other people. And initially it was just authors and painters, and then started talking to like life coaches and mentors. And I said, that also made sense because I just talked about the trauma that musicians and creatives go through. Well, who better to talk to than a therapist? When you talk to a therapist, you all get into like, self-limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
You get into the idea of, you just the inner child. And that's where art is happening because you're addressing that imposter syndrome. You're addressing those things. You're addressing the glass ceilings you put on yourselves. And it just became a way to kind of level up and expand for the modern era. The whole idea of this podcast and still be relevant and not do what I was doing in 2016.
Well, it's all the same, right? At the end of the day, you start with something that only you can see, nobody else can see it, whether it's a song, an album, a business, a product, whatever it is. and then you put in the time behind the scenes, and you hope eventually enough people see it where then you can do it for more people, and then that just becomes the cycle. And that's a creator, a musician, an entrepreneur, anybody. It's the same thing for us, right? We want more people to see the podcast so we can impact more people. You want more people to find the music so you can impact more people. It's kind of the human experience in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's just interesting because a lot of people told me when I was first doing it, like, you need to just do the singer-songwriter thing. And I did that first 2 years at a podcast. And then I started immediately, going talking to authors
Mm.
because I thought with songwriters and authors were in the same space. We're both writers. Like, we're doing more short form and they're doing long form. And I saw there's a lot of, parallels into what our process. A lot of writers go into flow state. They'll do world building, and because sometimes you map something down, you flow chart it out, and sometimes you create a very intricate world, and other times you kind of I'm just gonna go into a journal and just start writing, or jump on my typewriter and start writing, and it's the same process for both of us. And so it was easy to start blurring the lines. And I think a lot of times people are scared, and fear is the constant thread. No matter who I talk to, like, it always, fear comes up in almost every single podcast,
Yeah.
as the motivator or the limitation, or it's both.
It's one of the things that I learned I don't want to say pretty early. I was exposed to. I didn't learn. It took me a long time to learn. Most of our fears are just made up. And we make them up, and it's I could never put a song out there, because if I put a song out there and it's not good, everybody's going to hate it. When in reality, then that determines the fact that you just decided you're never going to put a song out there. I always say fear is a fence. Fear is a fence that we walk up to, we look on the other side, and we say, imagine what life would be like over there. The people who end up having the most fulfilling, growth-oriented, impactful lives usually take a step on the other side of the fence. And then they're able to help people say, look, it ain't what you think it is. Just because you release one song, it doesn't mean everybody on the internet's going to find it and hate you. Most people nobody's going to even see it. So facing the fear behind the scenes is really, really valuable. And we've realized that with talking to as many people as we have. Fear is lack of self-belief, or depending on the person, lack of self-worth. Those are two of the biggest reasons why people don't chase what they really, really want out of life.
Yeah, we run into people all the time that are like, I found people where sometimes I take a musician and make them jump on a different instrument, like a bass player, and make them jump on the guitar, and the guitar player jump on the bass, or a guitar player jump on the board. And a lot of times, what I'm looking for is, like, I don't need you to be the best piano player, but sometimes it's like what happened with Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen was a great guitar lead player, but when he approached the keyboard, he approached it different than a typical keyboardist. So he would approach it in a way like the way Pete Townsend approaches the keyboard as a guitar player, and sometimes that's very interesting because you get things like out of the Who, you get a song like Barbara O'Reilly, with the keyboard sequence is not something that Keith Emerson would have done, not something Steve Winwood would have done. It's not something that Rick Wakeman would have done, because Pete was approaching it with like a guitar player mindset. So sometimes it's like, you don't have to be the best. It's actually the fact that you have a different approach and a different mindset. That's okay. But a lot of people never give themselves the permission to think that's okay.
Yeah.
And the people that take the risk, they get big rewards. And then people try to clone them. They say, it's like, well, I'm going to copy that. It's like, because it's the thing is, like, there's no, the thing is, like, there's a big statement in music was like, there's no wrong note. It's how you handle that note. If you on stage hit a wrong note and then you make everybody feel like you hit the wrong note, right? Because by the way your body language is, then everybody knows you hit the wrong note, right? But if you take that note and then you don't act like you hit it, right? You just flow with it to the next thing, then nobody even knows you hit it. It's like nobody knows, like you said, when that person's like, they don't know what you're going to say, so you're not
Yeah.
going to really make a mistake. It's the same approach. If you take that approach in life, it's like there are no bad notes. There are opportunities. That note is an opportunity to take it to a different place that you didn't expect. And being able to be open-minded enough to accept that kind of, on the fly adjustment, that you don't have to start that diet because you missed step 4. Now you got to go back to step 0.
Yeah.
No, you live with the fact that you did it and keep on going.
Well, and I think that's why belief is so important, because you have to believe that it's going to be okay. I think that's, and again, I've never performed musically on stage in front of anyone, so I can imagine what that's like. But I've spoken in front of fairly large audiences, and that my standards for myself are usually higher than the standards of the audience for me. I want to hit every quote unquote note. I remember I got off stage one time and I was frustrated with myself because I forgot a word. And if I had that word, that would have flowed so nicely. Nobody knew what the word was, but I beat myself up. Maybe there's a fine line of construction for that. I want to make sure I have a very high standard for myself, but not to the point where, to your point, you're not going to step on stage because you're afraid you're going to play the wrong note. Living somewhere, juggling those two beliefs. Yeah, I think that's a good place to live.
Well, there's a lesson learned. Like you can, it's not like you don't make errors. What I call them like happy accidents. So you can learn from your happy accidents. Not every happy accident is going to go to tape.
Right.
Is it going to get to the final production? But the idea that you're going to get rid of all the happy accidents, what it does is it creates kind of antiseptic, kind of AI driven kind of stuff that's like perfect, but it doesn't sound right. It sounds like it doesn't have any life to it. And then you could even the same thing. I've talked to writers with some AI driven work, and they're like, well, it's lost some human aspects that it does. Yeah, technically it's perfect, but sometimes authors will do grammatic errors or things that aren't technically correct because it's part of their style.
Right.
Stephen King, if you run his thing through Grammarly, he's got things that are technically Grammarly would kick out, but it's part of his style. And if you took it all out, it wouldn't be Stephen King.
Right.
That's where people make the mistake. It's like trying to be perfect isn't the goal. It's like you can learn, and maybe you have a flub, but either it's kind of that balance between having lessons learned and progressing, and then knowing how much of that variability you leave in the mix.
Yeah. And that goes back to authenticity.
Yeah.
What do you want your work to look like? Really?
Yeah, it's very important.
There's no such thing as perfect. That's the other thing. You can't be perfect. There's no such thing. As human beings, you can run it through whatever you want, but when you're on stage and it's just you can play to the maximum of your potential.
Well, that's the problem today is we have tools as musicians that I can make my song sound exactly like what I did because I can just run it to the backing track.
Yeah.
So I could either run it to the backing track or take the risk of actually playing it live.
Right.
And if I play it live, there's going to be microtonal things that I don't match my original recording, but that's okay because as a child of the 70s, I went to see bands because I didn't want to hear them play it the same way as what I heard on the radio. I wanted to hear the live version. With a lot of bands back in the 70s, their live versions are significantly different than the actual studio version. But you get a lot of bands today that they've run exactly what they got because they're kind of slaves to their master track. And if you're running to that master track, you're locked in.
Right.
You have some variability, but you're kind of totally tied in. Whereas if you're a fully live band, you can decide that today I'm going to play a different version. But if you're locked into that thing, it's like, yeah, because I'm trying to make it sound like the radio hit. And that's one of the problems with some of the AI tools and the DAW tools. They lock you in. They restrain you. And I'm the type of guy, I don't like being restrained. I don't like it. So like, I'm not going to, people are like, it's a choice I make, and I have tools where I could be locked in. But I kind of run it with, I run my master my multi-track. I'll bring my multi-track on stage. And this is kind of a Nine Inch Nails trick. It's like they would bring their multi-tracks. Nine Inch Nails actually had their multi-tracks on stage, not their sequencers, and they would run them through effect pedals or effect processors. And they'd have a member of the band actively changing their original music and actually running it through things so they could actually alter it on demand. And so even so they can stay what they originally wrote, but then they could deviate and run it through all these things where it would totally deviate it and change it where you did not recognize them. And so it gave them the best of all worlds. If they want to run it the way that they wrote it, they can, but they can also deviate it.
I'm gonna have to listen to some Nine Inch Nails today as well. I believe I'm gonna have to put that on the docket for the rest of the day.
Yeah, Trent's cool. He's very, very interesting guy. But yeah, it's just I don't know. My whole experience with art is I think you should take risks, and a lot of artists, what you'll find is I go to a painter's house and they got all these paintings in their studio and they never send them to the gallery. And then I'm like, well, how many of these are in shows? It's like 1/10 or 1/100th of what they've got.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? Because they just don't feel it should be in the show. And I'm like, it's like that like sometimes you're not your best critic. A lot of times that's why you, as a musician, you have other people around you that kind of coax you to push one of those to the top.
Yeah.
And there's a whole history of artists like not picking the right song. Like if you like this song, tons of bands they would have picked a different single than their A&R people. And usually the song that they would have picked is not what the A&R guy picked.
Yeah.
And so it's like sometimes you're not the best judge of your own work.
Yeah. I would say more often than not you're not, because if you're making the music for yourself, you're not making it for other people. And it depends. It depends on, like, chefs. I imagine what a chef is cooking for themselves versus what they're cooking for an audience of 1,000 people. It's going to depend drastically on the audience of 1,000 people, what they make.
Yeah. It's like the interpretation, like, what they dig. And it's like you personally dig this, but like the thing that you don't think tastes good, your customers suddenly say, well, that's what tastes good. And you're like, well, I hate it.
Yeah, I just want a cheeseburger. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but I know you want to make whatever. You want to make a cheeseburger with gold and this and this and this and the finest stuff. I just want a cheeseburger. That's it.
Yeah, like people will like, and that's why sometimes they're throwing things at the wall, like with the way this net is, that like you kind of put it out on the wall, and we find that artists that put a lot of output out and put it on different platforms and kind of see where it goes. Even use pseudonyms. There's authors that will use a different name because they're a crime author and then they want to put a horror story out. So they put a different name and they put it out. They still get it out. They don't just say, okay, I'm just gonna, because they know my audience is like thinking this. Well, they're thinking I'm this. They think I'm tied to this. So then they put it out in a different way. And I think you just should be willing to share your work as much as you can. It's your own limitations that stop you. Usually, like you're the one that stops you.
Yeah, and you never know.
No one else does it, but you're the best one that's stopping yourself.
Right. And you never know which one's going to hit. You never know what song, what episode, what interview, what book, what article. You never know which one's really going to hit.
Yeah, it's just the struggle is interesting because a lot of people think people are overnight sensations. Yeah. They don't know how much work goes in to like because they see these people suddenly get big. And they don't understand how much work was done before they got to that point.
Yeah.
And it's never easy. Anything that's worthwhile usually is a struggle. It's a process. It's something that you perfect. And it's like people like you get a 12-step program and you think, well, after step 12 I'm done. It's like, no, you have to do that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I didn't know I have to do that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So I guess what's your biggest fear today? Because it seems like you've gotten over a lot of things.
My biggest fear is rejection, for sure. Rejection and disappointing people. Those are my two big ones. Like I had a rough day yesterday because we kind of sort of fired one of our clients. It wasn't working out, and
Mhm.
when I sent the message, they sent me all these messages back, and it was just like, I am disappointing this person so bad right now. And it threw me off the rails. The rest of my day was all over the place. I was triggered all day. It was brutal. So most of my stuff now, it's still the same as it was before. I just have a better relationship with it. I get rejected all the time. I'm in sales at our company. We're always talking to people about stuff. I get rejected all the time. It's better than it's ever been. It still sucks. But right now, it's probably the disappointment thing. Disappointing others is my Achilles heel.
Yeah, that's the hard thing, because like because when you put something out, it's like a lot of times people don't understand like the thing you like the most, like as an artist, like I'll put out a track and I'm thinking that this is it,
Yeah.
right? This is the one I really like, and the fans like the one I'm like, now I'll just put this out. I don't really like it, and then
Yeah.
that's the one they like, and then it was like, wow, I was like, why don't they dig the one I'm digging?
Yeah.
Well, I can't control what they're into. And so it's that kind of situation, or if I'm working with a collaboration, and it doesn't work out. Like I've worked on some projects with people, and we were all excited about putting something together, and we thought we were going to vibe. Spent a bunch of time, and then it's like we didn't vibe, and so that feels like and it's like when some of that stuff is like we could just work on it a little bit more, but there's sometimes like there's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Like if it's not working, it's not working. You can keep on trying and keep on trying, but like sometimes you have to accept, well, this project didn't work. And then you're like, like why didn't that work?
Well, there's lessons. There's always I think you learn more you learn more lessons from the losses than you do the wins because you have to change everything, but when you win, you try to change nothing. You just try to do what you did better, but you don't really know what led to the win necessarily. So losses are very constructive if you can get to the place where you actually find the value in them. Again, it took me many years to get to that place.
Yeah, because a lot of people think it's like the wins are the only thing. It's like all the losses are actually better learning experiences.
Yeah.
Like if you ever had somebody like I never failed, you're kind of like really,
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem like that seems truthful. It's like how
Right.
could you, because you look at Elon Musk, he doesn't do everything perfect.
No.
Like he was good at PayPal, he's good at or eBay, he's good at Tesla, SpaceX, and then he got to Twitter and like,
Yeah.
maybe that's not worth it. It is making an assumption because sometimes like it's not good, and he was willing to try something that was not his zone.
Yeah.
His zone is like manufacturing the new ideas that are like more tied down to like engineering kind of concepts, whether it's like mechanical or electric or computer engineering. But we went to something that was a social media, just assumed he could do it, and it's like, well, it doesn't always work. It's like so, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't try. It's
right.
You try.
But, lessons learned.
It's like you have to be willing to kind of push the envelope.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people get scared. And it could be, I think sometimes you have to be uncomfortable. And some people, they don't want to ever be uncomfortable, but it's like you're in a codependent relationship, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's like the comfort of being in something that's not productive, like you are in something uncomfortable, so why not push it?
Yeah. There's mud between where you are and where you want to get to. And that mud is usually uncomfortable and it's cold and it's dirty, but it's probably more uncomfortable and dirtier than what you're currently dealing with. But the grass is also, I know that I'll quote, the grass is greener. The grass is only greener when you get there because you're creating it through the mud. It's not green when you first start. It's green as you go and you get there. But yeah, to your point, it's overcoming the uncertainty. Sometimes we stick and we cling to the security of enough but not great because we're afraid of the uncertainty and insecurity of what happens between now and when we get to the place we want to get to.
Yeah, the security of mediocrity or like codependence or something unhealthy. like you're in a habit, it's a habit. To learn a healthy habit. Well, that's
Yes.
hard.
Yeah.
Which means I have to do this, like I said, for the rest of your life. Like
Yeah.
you gotta. Sometimes you have to have. If you're going to be physically fit, then you have to exercise for the rest of your life. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do it for 12 weeks and stop.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you have to be committed to doing that in a sustainable way for the rest of your life. Like eating healthy, you got to be committed to doing that for the rest of your life, or you're going to jump off the wagon and you go back to eating junk food.
Yeah.
And so everything's always, harder than it seems. And
of course,
if somebody sells you something that seems too easy, it's probably
not gonna is. Yeah, it probably, it's probably not real. Habits turn into lifestyle eventually. That's all it is. If you have a habit of smoking cigarettes and drinking and eating fast food, eventually that turns into a lifestyle. You're probably not going to go to the gym and take care of yourself and get enough sleep. But I think the opposite is also true as well. Habits become lifestyle when you do them long enough.
Yeah, and the lifestyle, just to be open-minded and actually start to love yourself. And that seems like, oh, that's foo-foo. But like if you don't love yourself, then everything else is not going to work. Right. And it's not arrogance to have the kind of self-love that's not required for you to be successful. And I think that's where people make a mistake is, well, that person's arrogant. It's like, well, they're not down on themselves. Like you're not going to progress if you're down on yourself 100%. So I think that's like the life lesson for me is there's nothing wrong with not being down on yourself.
No. Arrogance. I think a lot of people have arrogance mixed up. Arrogance is not having high belief in yourself. At least this is my definition. It's confidence without competence. So if I was to say to you, Phantom, I can make music better than you tomorrow. That is confidence without competence. I have no proof that is possible. I don't. I think that's arrogance. But I think on the other side of arrogance, there's self-deprecation, where if I said that to you and you were like, yeah, you probably could, that you're just self-deprecating. So I'm arrogant and you're self-deprecating. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle of, if I put in as much time, energy, effort, and focus, maybe eventually I could get to the place you're at. I don't know. Maybe. I think that's a humble approach. I think that's the difference.
Yeah, you gotta know your capabilities.
Yeah.
If you like, and then kind of push it. Like if you it's like knowing yourself. Like if you become self-aware and you're aware of your flaws, right?
Yeah.
And you're aware of what you are not able to do, then you can start to like admit it's like, well, I'm not the best at this, but I'm going to try. It doesn't mean I'm going to be better than this person X, but I'm going to try. And so instead of saying, well, I can never even do it, I'm not even going to try to do it. I'm just going to stay over here. I think that's like the better lesson. It's just like, there's nothing wrong with attempting it, but being overconfident without evidence is, it's probably not the best place to land.
It sets you up for failure. That's a growth mindset is saying, I might not be able to do it right now, but I can learn lessons and get to the point where I do it. A fixed mindset is, I am the way I am forever, and there's nothing I can do about it. And just working towards more of a growth mindset would be beneficial to us all.
Well, I think we had a great conversation. We always end up hitting over the hour faster than I think. But yeah, we actually hit it. And I do want to thank you for being on the show. It's great to talk to another podcaster. You've been out there. You're super successful. And that's awesome. And I appreciate being on the show. And it's like I said before, we're going to be on all the other platforms that you can watch or listen to a podcast later today. And we'll send you that information. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. As I said, I will be tuning into some of your music later. I was not joking about that.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.